Welcome to a special edition of Irish Illustrated Insider. I am joined by Tim Priester of Irish Illustrated, John Bryce of Irish Illustrated, and the Football Scoop, and we are here to discuss solely the college football playoff rankings that were released last night. We'll be back tomorrow with our regular podcast to preview Notre Dame and Florida State. Guys, we talked a little bit on Monday. We thought they'd come in somewhere between 9 and 11. They're right there at number 10. I guess before we get to Notre Dame, I wanted to ask you guys off the cuff, when you saw the rankings come out and now have a chance to review them, where is your first, not quibble, but actual argument going down the list?
Well, I don't know that I have more than a quibble. I think a lot of people are going to say Penn State, and I get that. I certainly get that. But I guess for me, maybe it's a little bit more than a quibble, but not too much. I'll get into that in a little bit. I guess, Tennessee probably has an argument there, and I would agree with that. But I'll get in more as to why it's only a quibble for me.
I think you could quibble about Georgia being three instead of number two, depending on whether or not you like Georgia's win at Texas better than Ohio State's win at Penn State, or Georgia's loss to Alabama, you think is better or worse than Ohio State's loss at number one Oregon. But I have a serious problem with Penn State at number six. I think that's trash, and I think we'll get into it more over the course of the podcast, because I really want to pick apart the comments from Ward Manuel last night that attempted to justify that. So there you go. That's where I'm at. It's early. I'm not a morning person. It's early in the morning. We're doing this pod, so you're going to get me involved.
I'm actually with you on the Penn State thing because, if Penn State was ahead of Notre Dame, I mean, the immediate response is Penn State lost at home to a really good Ohio State team, and Notre Dame lost at home to Northern Illinois. So that is the immediate argument. But it's ridiculous how high Penn State is. It's not that they're ahead of Notre Dame; it's that they're ahead of Tennessee, IU, and BYU. That's crazy to me.
Yeah, and look, I got all the texts last night from the same ones I'm sure all of you guys got from a number of Notre Dame fans that were like, "Give us that matchup right now." And I think that tells you all you need to know. But again, we'll dive into it more. There's plenty to dissect, but I just think you can quibble with several of them. I think that one's flat out wrong. Wrong.
I mean, I'm all for Notre Dame playing Penn State. Of course, that's going to change here over the next few weeks.
Yeah.
It's not going to remain the same. I'd love that matchup for Notre Dame. I guess this is going to get picked apart. I realize that. But I don't, first of all, we talk about strength of schedule. Theirs is 28th. Now, you can say that that's wrong, but that is the number. That's the working number that the committee uses. They have the 28th strongest schedule up to this point. And I realize that the teams I'm going to mention aren't world beaters, but as it relates to Notre Dame, Penn State didn't lose to Northern Illinois, or they beat Illinois. They won at USC in overtime. They won at Wisconsin by 2 touchdowns. They won at West Virginia by 3 touchdowns. I know those guys aren't world beaters, but the fact of the matter is that their strength of schedule is listed at 28th. I would have Tennessee ahead of them. I think I would make Indiana and BYU to earn it a little bit more before I would put them ahead of them.
I think BYU at SMU win, Kansas State win is just as good as at USC and Illinois. I mean, that's, and they're undefeated too.
If Kansas State hadn't lost over the weekend to Houston, a very rebuilding Houston that was absolutely eviscerated and embarrassed to open the season by UNLV, then I think Kansas State moves up some, and you probably see BYU as an ancillary beneficiary of that.
I think the reason for it is Penn State's in the Big Ten and BYU isn't.
Sure.
I mean,
I don't argue those points.
BYU's strength of schedule is 61. Indiana's is 103rd. Notre Dame is 11 out of 12 at 75 overall. JB, you mentioned Ohio State and Georgia. I would maybe quibble at that a little bit along with you, but Georgia is at Mississippi and Tennessee and Georgia Tech coming up, so they have plenty of opportunities to move up a spot from where they are after the first vote.
Yeah, that's why I'm excited to do this podcast. A great idea by UTP to have us add this extra one this week, because there's so much to dissect here, but also because we know point blank right away. Ohio State and Indiana face each other. That game is at Ohio State. I would expect Ohio State to win that. That's going to be a spot for Notre Dame to move up as long as Notre Dame continues to handle business. We know that Tennessee plays at Georgia next weekend. I expect Georgia to win that game. That will be another potential spot for Notre Dame to move up. So, yeah, you wanted to make sure that you saw Notre Dame in there. We said between 9 and 11. I thought 10 was right on the spot. That's where I pretty much expected them. I don't have an issue with where Notre Dame slots in nearly as much as I have an issue where Penn State slots in, if I haven't made that clear.
Tim,
Yeah, I mean,
what
before
are you?
Tennessee, Georgia has at Ole Miss. I mean, Georgia has the trials of Job coming their way.
Yeah, no doubt.
Georgia's got a chance to move ahead of Ohio State every week coming
Right,
up.
exactly. No, you're exactly right. Yeah, there's if Ohio State wins out and Georgia wins out, those will be your 1 and 2 teams. I don't have a doubt in my mind about that.
By the way, for the
Excuse
record,
me. Excuse me if Georgia and Oregon went out,
Yes.
or
Yeah.
Oregon
Yeah.
and Georgia, they went out. I don't
for the
have an
record, for the record, Tim O'Malley's idea to have the podcast, and
Oh,
I
yes.
jumped on it wholeheartedly. Um,
O'Malley, you glory hound.
Alabama at number 11 with the 11th most difficult schedule. They have LSU, of course. They're at Oklahoma, which doesn't carry as much weight as it has perhaps in some recent years in Auburn. I do like,
I
yeah,
mean,
I would have SMU ahead of Boise State, but again, that's a quibble. We're talking about 12
yeah,
and
yeah,
13.
that's a quibble. Alabama, man. I mean, they beat Georgia, they
Yeah,
beat Missouri, they
yeah.
beat South Carolina, they won at Wisconsin. Where's their schedule ranked? They
11th.
they lost to Vandy. That's a schedule.
Yeah, I know.
They
I
lost to
know.
Tennessee. That is an all 11th.
Well, they're the highest of the two lost teams, and a win over, like you said. I mean, they have an opportunity to move ahead of Notre Dame, A&M. Uh, well, we don't. I don't want to, or LSU rather. I don't want to
They have
get too
LSU.
far
Yeah.
down. Yeah, yeah, LSU,
Yeah.
not A&M. I don't want to get too far down the list here. But I mean, I appreciate the fact that Indiana was as high as eighth. And again, I look at when people tell me that Indiana hasn't played anybody, come on, man. I mean, this is Indiana. They haven't been 9-0 since I was um, 4, I think it was 7, something like that. Um, they went to UCLA, they won by 4 touchdowns. They beat Maryland by 2 touchdowns. They went to Northwestern, won by 17. They beat Nebraska by 49. They beat Washington by 2 touchdowns. They're beating the crap out of everybody they play. Michigan State by 37. I realize that these aren't powerhouses, but these are at in many cases at worst average football teams, and they're beating the daylights out of them.
Yeah, you know what we need? I'm jumping the gun here, but I think this is literally what I think is the most important thing with the committee is we need to change the ranked wins to the how the NCAA does it with quad 1, quad 2. And you probably eliminate quad 4 when you're talking college football, of course. But look, so when you beat a team, you move them down in the rankings. If that team was a fringe top 25 team, it doesn't mean they're no longer a valuable team. Like they're a team of value, even if they're number 31 at the end of the season. Indiana shreds teams. They absolutely shred fools right now. That's what they do. So who do they play? I don't know. They beat Nebraska and Washington, and they shred everybody. So they're in the right spot, and they're going to have their chance too, because they're going to host Michigan. Indiana is like the closest thing to UConn covering UConn basketball. They just murder teams out here
Yeah.
right now, and they're going to do it to Michigan too. And then
Bet, you
obviously they're
betting
going to have
on
their chance with
you
Ohio
betting on
State.
IU every week
No,
too?
I haven't. I should have been. I was looking back like how they kill everybody. It's just so
That's
yeah.
a
I mean,
UConn lesson, man. You should
yeah,
you learned the
exactly.
UConn
South
lesson.
Carolina women too. I got to give credit where credit is due. But I'm surprised we haven't moved into like the quad 1 being top
Yeah.
15, quad 2, top 30, top 45. Because if you're to look at like just like if you combined all the ranking systems, your favorite one, FPI, FEI, whatever, you can look down and see like, all right, we get to number 50. Does this team still count? And that's logic the committee can use and say, this is where we cut off a quality win. It can be different every year. There's 12 people in that room. Their ideas are tweaked every single time we talk to them. They can tweak where they want to cut off the quality win, but I think you should look at like a team. If Pittsburgh loses a couple times, is that not a good win by SMU anymore? It's still a good win. They were an undefeated team that SMU handled. it should count. And that's how I think we got to quit saying, like, well, if Louisville falls out of the top 25, they're still a good team. They're
Right.
obviously a good team. They're just not a top team.
You make a great point, though, about counting ranked wins versus how it's done for the NCAA tournament. Tom, the intern, has a really good philosophy about this, about maybe looking at ranked wins at the end of the season, or finding a different metric to judge those teams, because Navy immediately fell out of the
Yeah.
polls and then
Yeah.
followed it up with a really disastrous loss. So
And they would not have come
still
back
a
in had they won
quality
that
win.
game, right? Right,
Right,
JB?
right. They would not. It's still a quality win,
Yeah.
but is it a ranked win? Look, I know that most people are going to say, well, if it's ranked at the time, you take it. And especially when you have things like that, not that Marcus does, but when you have things like number of ranked wins baked into your contract, or Lane Kiffin gets $100,000 bonus every time Ole Miss wins a non-conference G4 game. So he got a $100,000 bonus for winning at terrible Wake Forest this year. So I get all of those metrics, but I like Tom, the intern's, Tom Zwiller. I like his mindset about that. I think it's a little more accurate and ties directly into what you're saying. Name them quad 1, quad 2, quad 3 wins.
Yeah. We just don't have, it's not like basketball. I mean, we don't, the committee gets together and votes here for football. We don't have anything else to use other than ranked wins at the time. Right.
I think you have quad 1, quad 2, and quad 3. You just look at the metrics instead of the voters. Like the Associated Press says Army's number 20, whatever. Look at your metrics, and when you're 12 people in a room, cut it off where you want to cut it off, at number 55 one year, at number 45 another year. Like, what do rankings have to do with anything anymore? It's 60 writers that watch one team all day voting.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And as if I guess I look at it as if, because it was, I understood last night, where they were slotting them in the 12 slots, but you also had them, rated 1 through 25. And I imagine for the first time, a lot of people were looking at that like, wait a minute, they're third, but they're because of the conference champs being slotted.
Oh yeah.
I'm sure it was pretty confusing for some people at some moments, but I don't. Okay, well, look, we all agree Penn State's too high. How far would you drop them?
I'm probably right in front of Notre Dame.
So from 6 to 6.
I mean, I think Notre Dame would beat Penn State. I've said that many times, but Notre Dame lost to Northern Illinois, and Penn State lost to Ohio State at the end.
John, you'd have Penn State behind Notre Dame.
I probably would, to be honest with you. And there's a couple of reasons why. I think that Penn State doesn't remotely have a win as quality as multiple
for sure
wins. And then here's my other thing. Here's the other thing that, and I couldn't be on the call last night. I had Atlanta radio and some other stuff, so I couldn't be on the college football playoff committee call. Even though I had the invitation or whatever, I would have liked to have been on there. I would have liked somebody to follow up with Ward Manuel, the Michigan AD, who's serving as the chair, who was asked to kind of defend Penn State's positioning and where it was. And he just said, well, look, they
just played a back and forth game against Ohio State. We obviously think a lot of Ohio State. Crap. No, they did not play a back and forth game, guys. They scored the first 10 points of the game, and then they trailed at home for the final 42 minutes of the game. The final 42 minutes, that's not back and forth. Where in the world is that back and forth? The seesaw went up and down once. That's it.
Yeah, their best win is Illinois, and then at Wisconsin and at USC. I still give them a little bit of that credit because when they played USC, that was a decent team.
Yeah, that's why I say I don't like, I realize those aren't world beaters, but those, I mean, those are good wins.
Those are quality wins. Notre Dame's got one more quality win.
Those are quad 1 wins, to your point. Now, another one, look, and they ended up winning it. So it washes away my argument a little bit. And Notre Dame's loss is worse than Penn State's loss. So again, I don't have an argument. I don't have a real major issue with Penn State being above Notre Dame. I just have a real major issue with Penn State being number 6 in the country. But I would also remind that Penn State was down almost wire to wire at that USC team, including down by double digits. And Penn State was down double digits at home to Bowling Green before finding a way to win. So when you dive into it a little bit deeper, no, they didn't lose to Bowling Green, a MAC team, and Notre Dame did lose at home to Bowling Green, a MAC team. But I still think that Penn State's overrated. And I think specifically, if you're just comparing them to Notre Dame, I like Notre Dame's resume better. But again, my issue is far more with Penn State being 6
Yeah.
than Notre Dame being 10.
Yeah,
Or
10
maybe
Actually, I contradicted myself because by the end of the year, Notre Dame's going to have a better resume only because because Florida State, Virginia won't matter. USC will be a same level of win, I guess, for Notre Dame over Penn State. USC was playing better at the time, but Army is going to help Notre Dame, and Penn State just has a game at Minnesota that I think they could lose. So I'm probably contradicting myself when I say I'd have them over Notre Dame, because I think if Notre Dame goes 11-1 and Penn State goes 11-1, I would have Notre Dame over Penn State by the end of this thing. But I think maybe I don't know why I'm judging it on the Army game. The Army game shouldn't be my barometer for Notre Dame and Penn State necessarily, but Notre Dame will then have 5 quality, whatever you want to call them, quad 1 and 2 wins, and Penn State will have 4.
yeah, and I guess and I had this wrong, so I do need to correct myself. But thus far, Penn State's only win over a ranked team was against Illinois, which again is no longer in the rankings. But unless Minnesota is ranked at the end of the year, and there's a chance, but it's not overwhelmingly likely. But unless Minnesota is ranked at the end of the year, that will be Penn State's only win against a ranked team, that Illinois team that has since lost to that same Minnesota team, had a couple of other bad losses in there. It's just a solid program, but not an elite program. So again, I just think it's a hollow Penn State team with a hollow schedule. And even more so, like I know Notre Dame is not playing a great schedule.
Let's talk about some of the other teams. We haven't mentioned Miami. They're number 4, the undefeated 9-0. But boy, they really have, the schedule has not been challenging. They beat Florida by 24. They did go to Louisville and win by 7 in a shootout. And when you look at the rest of their schedule, it's Duke, at Georgia Tech, which could be dangerous. I don't know what Haynes King's situation is, but we know that Georgia Tech's a much different team when he's at quarterback for them. Then they have Wake Forest at home and at Syracuse. So Miami's sitting in a pretty good spot. I guess the last thing I'd say about Penn State is, it's 7-1, and I hear where you guys are coming from. Clearly, their offense is really, really challenged. They don't, they don't have to play great football to win the rest of their games. They have Washington at home. They're at Purdue, at Minnesota. I agree with you, JB, that could be a real challenge. That will be a real challenge. I don't think there's any doubt about that.
I don't want to belabor the rankings thing. I want to tell you real fast, the rankings thing. JB made a great point. Minnesota might be ranked at the end of the year. They have to beat Penn State to be ranked at the end of the year. Are they not a decent team if Penn State beats them by 1 point? What Minnesota beats Penn State, so then they're ranked? Well, they're not ranked because Penn State beat them. It's just a quality victory somewhere along the way. Is what you just play quality teams.
Yeah, and the last game, of course, for Penn State is Maryland. So those are all games that Penn State obviously can win. Tennessee is at Utah, at Georgia, at Vandy. Among there's a fourth game there that I didn't even write down because it'll be a game they win.
They've got Mississippi State this week.
Mississippi State. Yeah, Mississippi State. Thank you, John. And then, of course, we are going to find out real fast how good Indiana is. And I realize that Michigan's not Michigan of the last few years, but still, it's Indiana against Michigan. It's at Indiana. And then, of course, the Hoosiers go to Ohio State to play. So we'll know. I don't expect. I expect Indiana to either win or come close to winning both those games.
I think Indiana's going to handle Michigan.
Yeah, I do too. Yeah. That might be my elimination pool pick of the week. They're a 14-point favorite at Michigan. My God, how times change so quickly.
I think this is important because JB and I talked about it. I think off the air we talked about this, JB. Tell everybody what happens when a 2-loss SEC team loses in the SEC championship game.
Look, that team's in. Maybe it ends up as the number 12 team.
So it's a 3-loss team is what we're saying.
Yeah.
Right. But a 3-loss team, if LSU wins out and plays for the SEC title against Texas or Georgia or whomever, I guess Georgia at that point, I'm not sure. But if LSU or whomever is in the SEC title game with 2 losses, it's been very strongly emphasized to me, expect that team in the playoff.
Even if they lose, if they lose in the playoffs.
Heather Dinich pointed out. I don't know if I heard it exactly right. There's been there's been a 3-loss team in the top 12 every year, since the 14 playoff.
And I could see that with, I mean,
So
with you have
that's
Alabama,
no,
Ole
that's
Miss, and
speaking.
LSU, and
Yeah,
A&M, they're all right there.
speaking to what you guys are speaking to with the SEC, that would certainly be the case.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I don't think an SEC team with 3 losses in the regular season
Right.
is a factor, but an
fair
SEC
enough.
team that advances to Atlanta and plays a Georgia or a Texas or someone like that and loses the game, I still expect, and everyone I've talked to would expect that team to be in the playoff. Otherwise, you'll hear Greg Sankey and others say, "This is why we are no longer playing conference championships. You've penalized a team that otherwise,
Yeah.
by
Yeah.
metric, would have been in your playoff."
And I think that's fair too. And JB, you're right. Indiana is playing at home against Michigan, which is partly why they're a 14-point favorite. Who else did I want to talk about? Guys, go ahead and chime in.
Well, I think when you're looking at Boise State, and they're they're in a rough spot. I mean, I guess the good loss to Oregon, they get credit for the good loss, right? Ohio State gets credit for a good loss to Oregon. Alabama and Georgia. I mean, when do you get credit for losing to Vandy is a good loss,
Well, it
Yeah,
should be
well, one
now.
other thing I was
isn't
just
it?
going to say real quickly on Boise State. One other thing is that their win against UNLV is considered very much a quality
Mhm.
win, and then they absolutely boat raced Washington State, which is
Yeah.
your number 21 team in the playoff rankings that only has that loss at Boise State. So I understand that if SMU keeps handling business, it will jump Boise State and somebody else right there. If SMU wins out and plays Miami, an undefeated Miami in the ACC championship game, then I think both of those teams get in. So depending on how you crunch the numbers and what you do, looking at the dozen team field or the projected dozen team field, if you're a Notre Dame fan, depending on your comfort level, you probably don't want to see one loss SMU playing undefeated Miami, because I do think in that scenario the ACC gets 2 teams. I think that's probably the only scenario the ACC gets 2 teams. And I think the Big 12 squandered its opportunity for 2 teams this past weekend when Texas Tech beat Iowa State on the road. And I still think, and I visited with some BYU coaches last week. I've got a feature coming later this week. I still think BYU will be in a real dogfight this weekend in the Holy War when they play at Utah inside Rice-Eccles Stadium.
So overreaction. I mean, I don't know that there's a massive overreaction to the first ballot here. I mean, we all agree that Penn State is too high. Texas at number 5. You guys are okay with that? Right behind Miami, which is undefeated, but not really having, their most significant win is at Louisville, and they almost gave up 50 points in that game.
Yeah, the Texas one's only a little tough because they actually don't have a good loss. They just have a nice handling butt kicking at their home turf to Georgia. It's not a good loss. They got handled.
They got hammered, yeah.
Yeah. So I also, I kind of agree with Greg McElroy on this one. I think Texas is good, but I can't use the eye test for Texas and not for other teams. So I don't. Texas could be too high. I mean, they're better than Penn State. I think they beat Miami, but what does it matter what I think? That's what I hate about sometimes when they say, well, the eye test, I think they beat them. Who cares what you think? We need resumes. It doesn't matter that I think Texas is good. They got handled in their big game. Now they have Texas A&M coming up. So, I mean, these things will all play out. When they won at Michigan, that was a good win, didn't you think? Texas?
And they controlled that game.
Yeah,
Yeah, that was a good win though. Like that's why I think like the rank that's a quality fine win by Texas. It doesn't matter that Michigan is not they're not a top 25 team, but it's still
not,
hard.
Maybe we haven't talked enough about Notre Dame here in this segment that we're doing. Obviously, they're in a
Yeah, we might as well finish
situation
with Notre Dame.
anyway. They're in a really good situation sitting here at 7-1. I never in a million years, well, it's certainly 8 weeks ago, did I think that I would sit here and say there is no way Florida State is beating Notre Dame this weekend. There's no
I
way.
felt that way since Louisville probably. Florida State's just awful. They're just so bad. They're just so bad.
Yeah,
They just quit a long time ago too.
And
I
they'd be
didn't.
winless had Cal not just completely squandered that game.
Yeah.
But Cal also squandered the Miami game.
Right. Right.
So yeah, I mean, I think we've hammered on Notre Dame, the merits of Notre Dame and where the Irish are right now. We certainly made the point that if Notre Dame keeps winning, it doesn't have to worry about who the 11 and 12 teams are, in my opinion, because the Irish will see some people in front of them fall, and they will continue to get credit where it's due as long as they continue handling business down the road. I do think it's hard to stress enough how much Irish fans need to be Army Black Knight fans over the next couple of weeks. Especially, I think Army is at North Texas this weekend, I believe. I just think that's
5-point favorite only, a 5-point favorite right now at North
yeah,
Texas.
I think that.
That was
And
the one game.
If Daly doesn't play, or Army can't win that game. If Bryson
Yeah.
Daly doesn't play this weekend, Army can't win that
At
game.
North Texas was the one game that I thought outside
Yep.
of Notre Dame, of course, that would be the most dangerous for them. Hey, we've been talking for weeks about, especially after Notre Dame lost to Northern Illinois, how high Notre Dame can finish. And of course, look, we've got a month of games still to go here, but they can't get to number 5, right? To
No.
host, but 5 through 8 hosts. How high do you think? And again, very speculative because of how many games that need to be played. But 11-1 Notre Dame, how high do you think up can they get?
I think most
Considering their
realistic
matchup?
is 7. 7 is probably about the highest they can get. Maybe a 6 if just everything broken their way. But I think the most likely best case scenario for Notre Dame is to be the 7-10.
Yeah, so you're hosting a 10 seed, which
I still think it could be Notre Dame Penn State. I just think Notre
yeah,
Dame might end up
yeah.
being a home team.
Pretty interesting. I did ask Tom the intern, the aforementioned Tom the intern, because he has his Zelo rankings. I asked him to do a playoff predictor. I asked him to do one for last night too, and I didn't like it, so I'm not going to use it. But the end of the season playoff, the prediction, he said it comes out like this, with everybody winning as they should have. Oregon, Texas, Miami, Brigham Young finishing undefeated. His model
Yeah.
loves IU, so Ohio State, Georgia, IU, Penn State, Alabama, Notre Dame. That, if you're missing it, is IU hosting Notre Dame. Is why I brought this up, because can
Yeah.
you imagine
That would
that
be.
is a playoff game that exists in the world?
I
IU
know.
hosting Notre Dame, not the other
I
way.
think it'd be fun as hell. I've never been in that stadium. Notre Dame played Indiana in the early 90s, and it was in Notre Dame Stadium. It
Yeah,
wasn't a home and home
that was the
situation.
first NBC game. That was the original
Yeah,
NBC game.
right, right.
I've been in that stadium.
Irv
They've done
Smith.
a lot of work to it. Bloomington's a great college town. That would be fun. I think there's a scenario where Notre Dame could host IU or
Me
Penn
too.
State.
Me too.
Quite
Yeah.
frankly.
I just brought that up. I actually think Notre Dame can get to 8 and host. And as you said, 7's possible. Things have to happen. But at IU, that crowd would be insane. The crowd
and
would
that's
be
gonna be
absolutely insane. That would be a great game to watch. I mean, Notre Dame would infiltrate too. It would be Notre Dame would pull Georgia on what Georgia did to Notre Dame. It would, but the IU fans would be rabid. That would be
yeah.
amazing atmosphere.
And there 4 days before Christmas, it would absolutely look like a Christmas tree because it'd be a bunch of red and gold.
And green, yeah,
So
the green and
and as for BYU and Tom's model, I mean, they love BYU. BYU's had good game control. They obviously won that game on the road at SMU, but let's remember they don't have to finish undefeated to be the 4 seed. That 4 seed, as long as they win the conference championship, I think that Big 12 champion would outrank. I know some people contend that Boise State could potentially climb all the way up and be the 4th highest ranked conference champion, and therefore knock BYU down somewhere, because the top 5 highest ranked champions highest ranked conference champions are guaranteed a spot, but only the top 4 ranked conference champions are guaranteed a bye. I think BYU would get that bye over Boise State if they were both the conference champions. So I don't think BYU has to finish 13-0 to be the 4 seed.
Tim, last time Notre Dame played at IU,
oh,
I
do not know. All right, so
I mean,
I gotta guess.
I had to look this.
I'm gonna guess because I know my dad was interviewed because when he was the dean of the medical school, it's the IU School of Medicine on Notre Dame's campus. So they actually interviewed him, asking him who he's rooting for, and he's like, "What are you talking about?" So, but I will say It was some weird anniversary. I don't know. I'll say 1939.
I'll say 57. 57.
It's 1950. Actually, Notre Dame has played IU 6 times since then. They've all been in Notre Dame Stadium, which, yeah, I don't know that I've
Were
ever
there any
looked to
playoff
see.
games mixed in there too?
No, I don't think I don't I don't know that I've ever looked up Notre Dame's all-time record against Indiana because it just wasn't pertinent other than 1991 when they came to Notre Dame Stadium. But Notre Dame has played there very infrequently.
It's the Irv
Uh,
Smith game too. Remember? I
yeah,
mean,
the
I used
Irv
the Irv
Smith
Smith
game.
game.
Yeah,
It's Demetrius DeBose, the late Demetrius DeBose with an interception touchdown. That was a fun day.
yeah, nine games at Indiana, but 1950 was the last one, and the first one was 1900. So that's a series that took place early in Notre Dame football, and then not again since 1991.
You guys any more on ND before we wrap it up? We have another podcast coming up tomorrow, of course. We can talk some more about Notre Dame football. Maybe not as much about Florida State as we're going to have to, but I think it's going to have to happen. I've been putting us off, Tim Priester. We got Florida State preview coming up tomorrow.
I'm ready. It's not going to be pretty for the Seminoles.
All right, yeah, I think I'd move Notre Dame up 1. I've corrected myself. I contradicted myself. But Penn State at 6 is my number 1 takeaway. That how in the world did that just happen?
Yeah.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Well, you know, that seesaw game in which Penn State trailed the final 42 minutes justified the Nittany Lion. In case I haven't made that clear.
John Bryce did make that clear of the football scoop, and Tim Priester of Irish Illustrated. I'm Tim O'Malley. Thanks for joining us on this special edition of Irish Illustrated Insider. We will see you back here tomorrow to preview Notre Dame versus 1-8 Florida State.